Hello everybody, my name's Aaron Guest. I'm a Redlands resident and a volunteer for the program Accelerate Neighborhood Climate Action, better known as ANCA. This is the second event in our new program called Resilient Living. Through monthly Resilient Living talks like tonight and how-to workshops, we hope to better equip all of us here in Redlands to face severe climate change. I think we can all acknowledge these days that climate change is real, and that it's a major threat to life on Earth. For example, just over 2 weeks ago, Hurricane Ian devastated large parts of Florida, causing 89 deaths and leaving 3.4 billion people temporarily without power, and causing an estimated $60 billion in total property damage. In California, we've experienced more than 6,000 wildfires, a worsening mega drought that's drying up our rivers, lakes, and reservoirs, and setting record heat waves. Just here down the road, from where we're sitting now, our fellow neighbors are experiencing massive mudslides, following fires, intense rains, and flash flooding. This is what accelerating climate change looks like, and there's no doubt it's going to get worse. Now, if you're not familiar with ANCA, we're a nonprofit organization with a growing number of volunteers deeply committed and concerned about climate action and climate change. Our mission is to build community resilience by bringing climate action to the neighborhood level, here at the Redlands level. By helping neighbors and neighborhoods build their own action plans for preparing and adapting to the impacts of climate change, we hope to make a difference. We hope you also check out the information and resources at the table here before you leave, and to sign up to get your neighborhood involved. Our program tonight focuses on the opportunity to empower each other to create resilient landscapes together for our wonderful homes here and for our community. As you've likely seen, our neighbors in the greater Los Angeles area are already being asked to say goodbye to their water-guzzling lawns and adapt their outdoor water use. Here in Redlands, an estimated 70% of our water use is outdoors. Therefore, we're presented with a significant opportunity to upgrade our neighborhoods to something much better for both now and the future. This evening's event builds upon our first workshop, which was about California's water crisis, and provides practical approaches and guidance to reduce lawn and turf and transform our local landscapes into resilient, drought-tolerant, and thriving spaces. We're honored to have speakers Molly Vogue, Linda Richards, and Brenda Spolstra. Our first speaker, Molly Vogue. Molly's 25-year career in city planning includes serving as a planning director in 4 California cities and a consultant to many others. Her work performing water-efficient landscaping became the passion for creating livable gardens after she replaced her own lawn. Together with Bill Schnetz, a design-build landscape contractor, she literally wrote the book, Life After Lawns, to offer practical advice on how to turn thirsty lawns into water-wise gardens. Their book breaks down the landscape process into 8 steps, which she's here to explain today. Our second speaker is Linda Richards. Linda and her husband replaced their dead front lawn when they moved to Redlands in the fall of 2018, about 14 years ago. She first became interested in California native plants when they moved to San Diego County in 2002 during a previous drought. Being from the Midwest, she was shocked that plants in natural canyons bloom beautifully and with flowers despite only several inches of rain. So then she set out to understand how California native plants survive in such conditions. Linda is also a garden ambassador for the California Native Plant Society, sharing her insights about her own yard and providing education about California native plants throughout the community. Finally, our last speaker is Brenda Spolstra. Brenda is the owner of Horticulture Buzz LLC in Redlands. She's a plant designer promoting the use of California native water-wise plants She comes with an education in urban and regional planning, architecture, and fine arts, and found interest in horticulture through the Master Gardeners of San Bernardino County. She holds a certificate in horticulture therapy. As a Redlands native, she grew up playing in the canyons, surrounded by native plants, and therefore has a deep connection with land. Her mission, which is her business, to transform residential property through plants meant for this local environment. She believes by doing this, Redlands will have more California aesthetic and be mindful of the resources that surround it. So, without further ado, I'll turn it over to our first speaker, Molly Bowman.
Thanks very much. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to come and speak to you tonight, and thank you all for coming out to this very important meeting in Redlands. I'm here to share my experience in changing my yard, my lawn into a garden. I wanted to share with you what I learned and hopefully help you avoid some of the mistakes that I made, because I really did learn from experience. So this is where we started. This would have been around 2008. There was a lot of grass there, almost an overwhelming amount. When I decided, I was working on a project where I was trying to get other people to do drought-tolerant landscaping, and finally one day my son said to me, "What about you? Look at all the lawn, look at all the runoff coming off of your lawn. Why don't you do something in our yard?" But I have to admit that when I went out there and looked around, I felt kind of overwhelmed. I'm not a gardener, I'm not a landscaper, and that is a lot of grass. I couldn't really envision myself going out there with a shovel and trying to figure out what to do. But 3 years later, this is the garden that we put in. Now, I didn't do it all by myself. I confess I had lots and lots of help, but it did get done, so it is possible. The lawn is gone. There's walkways, there's shade trees, there's a place to sit, and colorful plants. Now, I'm going to run through some before and after slides of my lawn. And what I want to point out to you is not just the amount of grass, but I want you to focus on the way that the space is used. Am I too loud now? No. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, is that better? Okay, all right. So think about how the space is used. When I contacted my friend, as Aaron said, our friend Bill Schnitz is a landscape design build contractor. He came over and walked over our lawn with us, and he said to me, "What do you use your yard for now?" And I said, "Nothing. It's hot, it's bare, it's empty, there's no privacy, there's no shade, there's no place to sit, and there's nothing to do." Oops, this way. Okay, this is the same view. So what we did was take that grass out and put in some hardscape, a seating area, kind of courtyard by the front door with some seat walls and some shade trees. So we took basically a flat, empty, two-dimensional space and created a place of 3 dimensions that is now usable. This was the side yard, the same idea. Number one, there's fences and hedges that kind of break up the space. You can't really walk around through the yard, and it's just not functional. There's nothing to do there. This is the same view after the garden went in. Now again, we have seating areas, planter islands, shade trees, and garden walls. Same idea here on the little side yard next to the driveway. It's just dead, empty space. What we did was create a drainage retention basin to catch the rainwater that was coming off the side of the roof, put in a shade tree to shade the driveway, and again, colorful plants. Same idea in the backyard, empty, unusable space, and this is what we ended up with. Some fruit trees, a vegetable garden with herbs and tomatoes, a place for the grandkids to run around, and again, shade trees. So those problems that I identified when Bill came over at the beginning, those problems were solved. And I'm going to go through with you how we did it. But before I do that, I want to make a few points for you to consider as we go through this process. First of all, as Erin said, my book is called Life After Lawns, and it says 8 steps from grass to a water-wise garden. But tonight I'm only going to talk to you about 6 of these steps, because the first step in my book was me trying to put down all of the reasons why people should consider changing for their lawns into a drought-tolerant garden. And I figured that you all have already done that, or you wouldn't be here. So you've already completed step 1. You're 12% into the process right now. So give yourself some congratulations for that. The second point I want to make is, why did Bill and I outline this garden conversion process in steps? Well, as I showed you earlier, we had a lot of grass. It was almost overwhelming. But with almost any task or any project that we undertake, if we divide that project into smaller chunks and take each step one by one, it's easier to get a handle on what you have to do next. So you can also save a lot of time and money if you plan out your steps and you don't do things out of order. The third thing I want to talk about is the scale of your project. Now, in our case, we did the whole yard at once, but you don't have to do that. You can start smaller. If you're not ready to undertake a huge landscape conversion project, you could at least do something along your parkway, or maybe along your driveway, or you could do something in your backyard. However you do it, and even if you do break it into phases, you should be aware that it's not going to be just like a weekend project where you go out to Home Depot and get some plants and bring it home and plant it. There really are some steps that you have to go through to make your garden conversion a success. And if you go into the process knowing that, then you're not going to be disappointed when you realize that it is really going to take some time and effort and possibly some upfront expenditure to do what you want to do in your yard. So the first step in my process is to start planning and design. And one of the first things that we did was kind of get an idea of the look that we wanted in our garden. And everybody's going to have a different idea about this, but I trained in geography. I'm a big advocate of the whole idea of the sense of place. And I live in East Highlands, which was the site of orange groves and olive groves, and the farmers would take the rocks and out of the orchards and make rock walls with them and stuff. So that was the look of the area that I lived in, and I liked that look. So that's what I went with. I have to tell you though that my son, who's an engineer, he likes a totally different look. He likes things to be very engineered, and you know, in nature there's not a lot of straight lines and right angles, but in his yard there's a lot of right angles and straight lines. But that's him. So what I'm trying to say is that there's no one way to do this. You know what your style is, and you know what you want it to look like. Once you have an idea of how you want your yard to look, start to think about making a plan. On the left side is the existing conditions in our yard, And this is very helpful. You can take a piece of graph paper and do this by yourself if you want. Get the dimensions, put down your existing structures, your house, put down your existing trees that you want to remain, walkways and driveways and so forth. That gives you an idea of what you've got to work with in terms of any new plants. Now, on the right is a kind of a rough landscape plan that we used for our yard, but you don't even need to be that detailed if you don't want to. But at least take another piece of graph paper, put down the existing conditions, and then start to make kind of a bubble diagram. Like, this is where we want the dog run, this is where we want the tot lot for the kids, this is where we maybe have a pool or a spa, this is a new planting area, this is where we want the vegetable garden. Again, thinking, actually sit down in your family and make a list of what you want in the garden, what you want to keep in your yard, and what you want to replace or get something new. And here you can get some help from one of our speakers. She's going to talk a little bit later about how to come up with a plan for your yard and the steps that you can follow to do that. After you've got your plan, the next step is to kill the grass. We had Bermuda grass, which is a bear to kill. It's, as you probably already know, it can have roots and rhizomes that go down into the ground several feet, and unless you kill those or get rid of those in some way, it'll just keep popping up in your yard year after year and take over your new garden. So make sure that you really get it dead. There's a number of different ways to kill the grass that are outlined in the book, and you can find information in other books about that. I won't go into detail, but make sure it's dead. I was lucky in my yard conversion project that several of my family members own construction companies, and maybe that's not the case with you, but it was really handy because they brought this excavator onto the site, and within 2 days, they had stripped off the old grass, they had done some minor grading of some detention areas and some mounds for planting, got rid of the old concrete walkways, and it really helped. I mean, it would have taken months and months of work that was done in just a few days. So here's an area where if you can get some help, try to do that. And this is a really important step, because even though we live in a climate where we don't get a lot of rain, when it does rain, it pours sometimes. And if you're not thinking about where all the drainage is going from your driveway and your house and your sidewalks and everything, you're going to end up with little puddles in your yard. And the one thing that drought-tolerant plants cannot stand is to have their roots sitting in a little mucky area of wetness. So we put in an underground drainage system that took most of the drainage in the yard into the little rock line detention basins. And the reason that we did that is, yeah, we don't get a lot of rain, so why should we let our rain just run off into the street and into the city sewer system? Keep that rain on your site, let it sink into the ground and water your trees. So those underground lines, ultimately, the water ends up in these little basins. There's about 2 feet of gravel underneath the rock. So the idea is that the water sinks into the ground, and then you can plant some plants around the basin, and it ends up looking like, a little rock garden. Who knew that it's actually part of the drainage system? The other thing is, if you want to bring some big rocks onto the site and you've got some equipment to do so, even with maybe a backhoe or something, now is the time to do that. Here's a situation where on the left you can see that we dug out a drainage detention basin and mounded that dirt up to plant a tree next to the basin. So now the tree roots just can go down and suck up the water from the drainage detention basin. One of the reasons for mounding up the dirt like this is because we have horrible soil. In Highland, we have basically compacted, decomposed granite, which most of the time is like concrete. And I know here in Redlands, you have a lot of clay in your soil, which can be very difficult to plant in. So one of the ways to get around the bad soil is to bring new soil in and mound it up and mix it with your native soil and try to get some organic matter into the soil and plant on those mounds. Another thing you should be aware of is that your neighbor's Bermuda grass will try to come into your yard after your garden is built. So we put 18-inch deep root barriers along the sides of our yard and then covered those with concrete mow strips. And they're pretty effective. I mean, I have to give it to the Bermuda grass. It does crawl over there, and I have to go on my hands and knees and pull it out once in a while. But it's a lot better than it would have been had we not protected the edge of the yard. If you're going to bring in large trees, now is the time to do it. If you have large equipment on your site, the reason you don't want to wait on this is once you've got your plants in the ground and your walkways and other things constructed, you can't bring a big piece of equipment on the site anymore without ripping up what you've already done. So this is another example of where doing things, steps in the proper order can save you money. I grew up in the North Woods of Minnesota, and I really love to be around trees. And the other thing is, if you're going to do a garden, put some shade trees in. You know, it was mentioned earlier how much it's just getting hotter and hotter every year, and the shade trees just make a tremendous difference. And we went ahead and put in this patio that I showed you earlier, and some flagstone on the patio. This is an expense that you don't have to do, but it was part of the garden that we wanted to do. In some other areas for walkways, we just used stepping stones, and we poured some walkways between the street and the house, and also from the driveway to the house. So now we've done a lot of work, got a lot of steps done, and it seems like we should be ready to plant, but no, we have a couple things to do first. I mentioned earlier how bad our soils are, how deficient in organic matter they are. So we went out to a place called One Stop in San Mateo Canyon and got a load of compost and dumped it on there, and we had to put it in wheelbarrows and wheel it all around into all the planting areas and shovel it in, work it in with shovels and rototillers and so forth. And it's been pretty effective. I think it would be very difficult to plant a garden without preparing the soil like this. The next thing we have to do is add water. Of course, no plants are going to grow without water. One of the things to know about drought-tolerant plants is that they're slow growing. Of course, you go out in the Mojave Desert and you see that they're very slow growing. One of the reasons they're slow growing is because they don't get a lot of water. They can't stand being flooded with the kind of sprinklers that we use for lawns. It's too much water, it's too fast, there's too much runoff. So we look for sprinklers and other kinds of irrigation that has what we call a slow precipitation rate. You can use overhead sprinklers. This shows that we use gear-driven rotor sprinklers in some of the really dry areas of the garden. In the planting beds up by the house, which are much smaller, we use micro sprayers, but they're made by a company called Hunter, and they're made for drought-tolerant plants. And I would encourage you not to try to use lawn sprinklers. Even if you're going to use your existing system, switch out the heads from lawn sprinklers to a low precipitation rate sprinkler head. You can also use drip irrigation, and there's a couple different kinds that you can use. On the left, you see individual hoses going to an individual plant. On the right, you can see if you have a large planting bed, you can get hoses that have little holes every 6 or 8 or 12 inches that you can lay through the planting bed. Now, finally, at the end of the process, step 7 in the book, we're finally ready to put plants in the ground. Yay, this was my favorite part of the project. In fact, one of the big mistakes I made, I told you I'd share my mistakes, I couldn't stay away from the plant sales. UCR at their Botanic Garden, and in Claremont at the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, I was always haunting those places, stockpiling plants. At one point, I think I had 45 plants on my back patio, and I'm running around trying to water them every day. Well, meanwhile, Bill is saying, don't you realize we have to build the garden first? So my advice to you is, are you waving at me?
I'm saying that there are chairs over here.
Oh, okay. So don't buy your plants first. Understand that there are steps you're going to go through. So here we are a year from the day that the plants went in the ground, and it looks really bare, doesn't it? Another thing I mentioned earlier is that drought-tolerant plants have a very slow growing rate. But on top of that, there's kind of a saying about plants, and the saying is, in year 1, they sleep, in year 2, they creep, and in year 3, they leap. The reason they take that time is because they have to establish a root zone that can support new growth of the plant. So here's year 2. It's still pretty bare looking. The people in the neighborhood are kind of walking by looking at me going, a real desert garden, huh? But by year 3, you can see all of a sudden the plants have really put a lot of growth in. If you're uncomfortable with the idea that you have to wait for them to grow in the first couple years, you can put in what we call filler plants. I used some monkey flower, or you can put autumn sage or something like that to fill in those places and make it look like it's not some kind of a, desert garden. Now I put together a handout for you, and I think most of you have picked it up. It looks like this, in which I made you a little cheat sheet so that you don't have to write down everything I just told you. And that is, I've laid out the steps for you and when you should think about doing it. The best time to put plants in the ground would be in the fall. If you put them in, new plants in the spring, then those poor plants have to get through August and September when it's 120 degrees, and it's very difficult to keep them through the first summer. So working backwards, if you know that you want to plant in October and November, and working backwards, all the steps in the process, making your plan, figuring out what you want in the yard, doing any demolition, hauling away the old spa or the old tire swing or whatever you want to get rid of, killing the grass. Best time to kill the grass would be July and August when it's the hottest part of the year. Working all the way back is when you should start thinking about what you want to do over the next year. So when I say make this your garden year, these are the steps that you would go through. I'm not going to read them because you've got them on your handout. But you go through your design process. You decide, how big of a phase do I want to do this year? Do I want to do the front yard or just the backyard? Then you want to build the bones, any new walkways, any new seat walls, any new patio areas. When you're getting ready for planting, make sure your grass roots are dead and strip off the old grass. By the way, when you strip it off, don't try to rototill it back into your topsoil, or it'll just start growing again. Take it to a recycler like One Stop and let them compost it. Do any minor grading you want to do to retain your rainwater, install your irrigation, and start thinking about your plant palette. I'm not going to talk about plant selection because that's what Linda's going to talk about today. Step 5, my favorite part, go to all the plant sales and all the local nurseries, and if you have smaller trees that you want to plant that don't involve bringing in heavy equipment, now would be the time to do it. and start filling up your lawn with greenery and flowers. Add your irrigation, spread your mulch, and enjoy your new garden. Now the first year, one caution on plants, we call them drought tolerant plants, and we think, well, they should be able to go a long time without water. Not the first year. The first year, as I mentioned, the root systems are trying to get established, and you can't really let them dry out completely the first year. So you have to be careful the first year to make sure that at least the root balls are moist and not completely dried out. And when we have the Santa Ana winds, you want to water before the winds are coming, and maybe deep water any trees that you're trying to get established. And then enjoy your new garden. So these, again, this is a review of the steps in the process. But the other point I want to make again, as I said in the beginning, when you go home and you look at your yard tomorrow, try not to think of it as a flat, two-dimensional space with some green grass growing on it and that you want to take the grass out and just put a different kind of ground cover or different plants. Try to envision in your mind a three-dimensional space that you can create a garden with an outdoor living space for you and your family, your kids and your grandkids, to really enjoy being outside. It's more than just taking the grass out and putting some other plants in. Create a place for yourself and make a garden. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. My name is Linda Richards, and I am here to talk about plant selection, which is an overwhelming topic for 20 minutes. So I'm going to be talking about the plant selection that we used in our yard and some favorite plants that we have had and some other people who have replaced their lawns. You'll see that I have many natives on my list, California native plants, because we are really supporting habitat value. We love butterflies, we love the insects, we love birds, and the birds need the insects. So you'll see that I have more natives than other plants, but I have both. I have a website, and it's on the handout that everybody should have. So I won't go into detail about a lot of things, but on my website I go over my favorite plants, I go over our conversion process, taking care of trees, things I've learned, so please go there. And then I have my email. I'd like to start with the takeaways so that you listen hard. Number one will be with plant selection is know your site's characteristics, and Molly talked a little bit about that. I hope you come away thinking, I want to plant some California native plants. 3, Molly emphasized this, so I won't go into it. Starting small is great, or you can start big, but you certainly learn a lot from any conversion that you do. And then the last one is just kind of an unusual one that I like to get across, is that bugs are good. Only 1% are harmful, and a lot of people freak out when they see caterpillars on their plants. Well, caterpillars mean butterflies and moths that feed our birds, so I'd like to get that point across. But driving over here, I had one exception. I hate those mosquitoes. I had one of those 80s mosquitoes in my car, and I hate those things. So this is our experience. We moved to Redlands in fall of 2008. It was a short sale. They had stopped watering the lawn for months. And this is after we had a little rain, so it was mostly weeds, and some of the grass was coming in again. But we had done some conversion in San Diego County. So when this happened, we thought, oh, how terrible, the lawn is dead. So it was a great opportunity for us to start replacing it. And we did decide to replace the whole front, which was about 2,500 square feet. So we were lucky in that, and looking back, our plants got established very well, as you'll see. The month before we planted, it rained a lot, and the months after we planted, it rained a lot. So we also planted when we planted them, or watered when we planted them, but we were lucky in that we had great rainfall. So what we've learned, because at times we will plant something over the last few years, and we didn't water it enough because we didn't have the rainfall. So really water your plants right before you plant them. When you're planting them, you can't overwater because they really need to get established. So we hired one person, one guy, strapping 25-year-old, and he brought in a friend. And so he dug out all the lawn. Then we had a slope, so we were looking at that, how the water would drain. So we did bring in some rocks. And then he dug in some of these rocks. I think that makes things look good. I've seen a lot of yards where people will just plop a big boulder on top. It's better to dig them in, which does take a little work. So good to hire somebody for that. So this was the month after we planted. This is 3 years later. And so some of the, like this is a ceanothus. This can grow 10 feet in 3 years. It's a California native plant. It's a wild lilac. And these are our manzanitas that took off. And again, I think it was because we had so much water. So the takeaway is, if we don't have that much water, rainfall this year, just water heavily. And then this is 3 years later in 2016. So we have kind of a wild jungle aspect to our yard. As Molly was saying, you know, you have to see what you want for your yard. We do have some paths back in there, and now we've had a few things die, and we're actually glad because it restores a path. But this is our yard. We did keep the lawn, the original lawn, a little piece of it, and then a couple years later, we changed to a more drought-tolerant lawn, which we water now once a week. In the times that it needed, in the non-rainy seasons. And so we use 2 western natives, buffalo grass and blue grama, but there's other drought-tolerant grasses you can use. There's some sedges out there, dune sedge, and a field sedge, or yarrow can make a nice lawn. So if you want to have a little lawn, you can find something that will require less water. And for us, we let it grow, so it also, we don't mow it. Once a year, we cut it back. So the steps to your plant selection. First, look at your property, and we really believe in retaining your old trees. I kind of die a little bit when I see a 50-year-old or an 80-year-old tree being cut down, unless there's some issues with it. So strongly support keeping any old trees on your yard, and old shrubs, especially natives. This right here, this is all one big sugar bush. I'll talk about that. That's a California native. We found a fire scar on it, so that was before there was development, so it's probably at least 80 years old. So there's not a lot of good plant identifier apps now to figure out plants that you have. And then we have a oak right here. A neighbor has a great oak that has lots of babies on our yard, so we tend to keep those. Understand your location and your. So understand your location is the second step. So in our case, we faced it west. It was hot, so we knew that we had to plant really sun-tolerant plants, because it was going to be a while until some of the trees grew. And so one thing we learned, we planted some plants that said part shade, that said full sun or part shade. Don't plant those in a real sunny area. If it says part shade, they need to be shaded by another plant or behind some trees or on the north side. And then of course your soil type. We found that ours was pretty loamy. We do have some hard pan underneath, but our drainage isn't too bad. So there's a soil test that we can talk about in the Q&As if people don't know what their soil type is. And then third is group similar plants. Group your sun plants together, your shady plants together, and look at the watering needs. I'll refer to a great website for California natives that will tell you how much water it needs, and you want to group those together. That was one of our lessons that we learned. We didn't always do good grouping. So most of the plants, if you go to the Home Depot or anywhere, they're going to be, if they're drought tolerant or water-wise, they're going to be from Mediterranean climates. We're lucky to live in California that is one of the 5 zones of Mediterranean climates. They all tend to be on the west side of the big continents. So right here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they all are typified by having a dormant or rest period in the hot summer months. And then in the wetter months, it's variable rainfall. And the good thing about California and California plants is, of the 5, California receives the least amount of rainfall. So they'll do better on average than plants from other areas. Notice natives also support local ecology. Native wildlife depends on native plants to survive, and there's some examples of that. I think the best way to get that across, there's a few examples I'll share. We all have eucalyptus, in our cities and all throughout California. We have several in our yard. And eucalyptus comes from Australia. So back in Australia, it's host to 48 different species of insects in its native California. Those insects need that eucalyptus to grow on. Here in California, there's only one of our insects that can use eucalyptus to grow, because they didn't come over here. They have a whole different insect population over there. California oak, in contrast, is one of those keystone species. If you can have an oak on your property, that's great, because it is a host to 500 species of just caterpillars alone. A large, mature oak. So kudos if you're able to have an oak on your property. So why is this important? 96% of our birds feed insects to their youngs, and some of our birds eat 300 insects a day. We have virtually no spiders on our property. I mean, our bugs are almost all gone because we have such a burgeoning bird population and nesting birds now. So, favorite plants. One of my favorites is Nevins barberry. How many have heard of Nevins barberry? A few people? Okay. It's endemic here in our area, and it's thought it could be extinct. I just heard that they think there might be 3 in some canyons, so they're still trying to find those. But we planted those on our property. We planted 3, and they've done great, and then they had offspring, which we've been able to use. And it was kind of fascinating. They have a nice yellow flower in the spring, and then berries in late summer, which feed the birds. And the first year, the birds didn't recognize it, and the berries weren't eaten. And then we discovered the birds found them, and now it's really popular. Here's a mockingbird eating it, and then now they're all fighting for it. It's a little prickly. That's one drawback. So it's good for right next to the neighbor that you don't like. Other favorites, sugar bush. Now, these are all large shrubs, so if you have room, it's large and it's green. And we now water our former lawn about every 3 weeks in the summertime. So we want a very drought tolerant piece of property or landscaping. Some people want to have, more, they're going to have more water, they're going to do weekly water. Then you have more plants that you can have more plants types. So here's an example right here. Here's a sugar bush that came up on its own, because we have a lot of sugar bush on our property. And then here right next to it is a Canary Island sage, which can be beautiful. It's gorgeous in the spring, but this is just a couple weeks ago. 3 weeks of water is not enough for it. So we love it just because it's always green. And then, especially our old one is 80 years old. It has blooms all the time. It seems like there's some part of it that's always blooming. Toyana is another one, California. Berry or holly. It's like Pittosporum, but the birds love it. And it also brings a lot of native insects in the summer. Manzanita, as I said, we've had great luck with it. Some people I know have tried and they haven't, and I think it's been during this drought where it's been a little bit harder to establish. So I think if it's really watered well, it should do great. And there's many species and all sizes. There's some low-growing ones and really large ones. So I strongly encourage considering Manzanita. And another great thing about it is if you plant, once it gets to a good size and has some flowers, we always have bumblebees in our yard in January and February. It's really fun to watch the bumblebees. There's a lot of different hummingbird plants, and I'll show you a website where you can just plug in if you want a hummingbird garden. They'll come up with a whole list of possibilities. But Anisacanthus, these are both non-natives that are really nice. So Anisacanthus is this one that has the tubular flowers that the hummingbirds love. There's a lot of sages too, Mexican sage, autumn sage. They like weekly water, and you can actually water a little bit more. So if you have an area where you have some fruit trees and you are going to be watering more, some of your sages are really great things to consider. There's Pride Madeira. It's native to Portugal. It's in that Mediterranean area of the Mediterranean zones. And then other non-natives that have done well on our yard are rosemary and lavenders. The lavender we find we have to go out and water it more than the rest of our plants. So again, if you have an area where you're going to water a little bit more, that could be good. Buckwheats is another really good plant to consider that does well in this area. It's a keystone plant, which is like an oak. It means that it supports so many insects, birds, and butterflies that it has like a little ecosystem of its own. And it provides year-round color. It has the nice white blossoms here. And this is a really large, if you want to have a large size one, St. Catherine's lace. The botanic name is giganteum because it's so large. And there's lots of small versions, a red buckwheat, there's a saffron buckwheat. So that's a great one to consider, and it's done really well in our yard. And then the unexpected, we had some agaves, and we were really kind of cursing because agaves can grow really big, some varieties of them. But then it started sending up this stalk here, which it does, and I like to point this out, sometimes I see people cutting off the stalk because they don't want their agave to die. Well, it's the same chemical that causes that agave to send up the stalk, causes it to die. So it's too late once it starts. But it was a real wildlife parade. We had so many birds and butterflies using it after that. It's good with whatever plants that you use, to consider having some fall and summer blooming plants. That's our hot period. It's hard to find those plants. So I have some listed, more than I have here on your handout. But fuchsia is a great one. That does really well at this time of year. And here it is feeding the birds. And then your golden bush. Yeah, this is a type of golden bush, are great. Ours hasn't even started blooming, so it'll be, November, December. It should look really good. Mallows are nice. So it's good to plant year-round for color. Shady favorites. We also had a section in the back where we had, I forget what the invasive plant was, so we took that out and it was in a shady area. So these are our shady favorites. Again, these are on your handout. Mahonias, currants, monkey flowers. And then this one thing that makes California plants easy is there's calscape.org. It's a great website where you can plug in your zip code and it will spit out a list of plants, thousands of plants. But then you can go to the advanced search and put in your drainage. You can put in how much sun or part shade. You can put in if you want to have hummingbird plants or butterfly plants, and then it will narrow down the list of plants to consider. So it's really a great tool for helping select what you want to have. And then each one will have a great description. So here's this, and then actually the description would go all the way down here. That it lists the butterflies and moths that it's host to. It goes into a lot of detail of how much water it needs. These are our wild birds. These are our macaws. So a few last lessons learned. Yeah, planting in fall into early winter is what Molly had said. As I mentioned, group plants by sun exposure and water needs. That way you are not going out and watering something a little bit more. And then Molly went over it pretty well about how the watering is especially important. You don't want to let that root ball dry out, especially important in your first few months. With some of the plants we had, they really shot up and did well, but you can assess how they do when that first spring comes. And then watering on time, and this is for all plants, replicate nature. You know, it's when you have a cloudy day or it looks like it might rain, a cooler day. Those are the great days to water if we are in a drought that continues. What we plant matters. So this is a view in the fall of the side of our front. So, you know, this is the fuchsia. This is a buckwheat. This is the St. Catherine's lace, or giganteum buckwheat. This is our manzanita. This is like 3 years old, I think, and our manzanita is doing great. And then we have bird baths around to satisfy the wildlife. So takeaways, know your site's characteristics. Now's a good time, you know, look and see, okay, where did the sun set? It's summer solstice, where does it set in December? To know, you know, how much sun and shade, the area that you're thinking about putting in drought tolerant plants. Plant some California plants. Start small or big, even as we've talked about. And then that bugs are good, especially if you want habitat and you like birds and those kind of things. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Thanks everybody for hanging in there. We've got a lot of information coming at you this evening, so I'm just happy to see so many people that want to engage with drought tolerant or California native planting. We know that our yards are a lot of work. Can I see a show of hands of how many people spend a half hour to an hour in their yard every week doing yard work? All right. How about 3 hours a week? All right, yes. So we're all very well acquainted with our yards. We love them, we may not love them, but they're there because we bought the property or we're renting the property. So either way, it might be your landlord or yourself that's taking care of it. So I'm here to talk about design. Molly did an awesome job of writing a book. Let me get to my slide here. Molly did an awesome job of 8 steps that she learned, and I'm here to present on a sliver of step 2, which is design. My background is in architecture and urban planning, but this stage of life, I went into landscape. I would hear all conversations about sustainability. This was probably about 15, 20 years ago. And I wasn't doing anything personally about it. So I'm here to help the community design some yards that are more sustainable, hopefully. So I'm going through my design process with you tonight, and hopefully the advance will click. So my first rule is listen to the customer. So what I do, my very first step, is I give you a questionnaire, and it's what plants do you want to keep? How do you use your yard? All those things that Molly went over. I give you a questionnaire because guess what? It's not my yard, it's your yard. So I want to know everything that you want to do with your yard and how you want it to look. Here's the first little bubble diagram that I would sit down with you and go over your yard. This is a job that I did up in Yucaipa. So basically I go out and I'll measure your area. This woman just wanted her front yard done, taking out the lawn. Same story as what we've heard before. So I go out there, I take measurements, I take notes of what the site conditions are like. I research the views, so I go and I stand by the front door and I look out and see what kind of view. I talk to the owner about what kind of view they want from their window. This woman didn't want a view from her window. She wanted more privacy from the street, so I had to keep that in mind with the design. Functional ideas, so what is your circulation path? Like, how are you going to get to your side gate? Are you going to leave a space open? She had existing pathways, so I just worked that into the design. So then in the end, I come up with a bubble diagram I can work with. So the first step I go to is a conceptual design. This is that pencil sketch level. So basically, after you get the bubble diagram done first, I start laying out, taking into consideration what the owner wanted done. She wanted color, she wanted a little bit of a screen from the street, and then the builder had put in a swale in her lawn already that kind of delineated her lot from the next, so that became a nice little dry creek bed. So that area is right here. So this conceptual design is basically shapes and sizes and maybe some plant ideas. It's not like firmed up yet. So if whoever you hire to work with you comes to you with like, these are the ones we're gonna put in. And you're like, well, I might not want that one, or how much pruning does that one take, or am I gonna have to cut that tree back? It's like the maintenance. So that half hour of yard work becomes 4 hours of yard work. So just keeping in mind that. So here's a close-up of the conceptual design so you can see it a little bit better. So this corner is, I like to group things in 3s or 5s because then it gets a nice mass of planting. So this one's called a Bee's Bliss salvia. It grows really well in our area. It keeps nice and low. It sends up a beautiful lavender flower. So then the other thing I'll sit down is like look at your plant palette, color and texture. I'm kind of a texture freak. I really like texture. I work with California natives primarily, so from the distance, some of them can just look like green, like backdrop plants, but I like to bring in like some color and some textures that will contrast with those, so it makes it a little bit more interesting. And then this is the final design that I would give my customer. It's a full scale, drawn to scale. Usually it's a 1/4 inch equals a foot. You get an electronic copy and a hard copy. That way you can make notes on it as you're putting it in, or if you're a landscape contractor. So this plan you can hand to a landscape contractor and say, here's my plan, this is what I'd like. Because there's some guys out there that just want to install. They don't want to think about the plants. Even some landscape architects will hire garden designers to come up with a plant palette because they don't have time to do all the research. But if you've done the research already and you have a list of plants that you absolutely love, your planting designer should work with you and should say, or should know how to incorporate those plants into the design. Because I'll go back to what I said before. This isn't my garden, this is your garden. So we work with you. So each plan will be labeled with a plant schedule as well. And then there's a few dimensions. So this one was really important. Their driveway was down here. So we need to keep this view open. So when you're backing out of your driveway, these are all staying really low. Also, if you live in an HOA, or if there's other design requirements that you need to know, make sure you have those ready for your designer. So, or if you have to have a permit from your city, do your research there. Parkways are often an area where a city will say, we don't want to see any gravel in your parkway, we just want to see planting material, or vice versa. They might say, we don't want to see any planting material, we want to see something that people can walk across. Thankfully, there's a ton of plants out there that you can walk on and it won't harm them, and it looks like carpet. So just do your research. Molly's book is great. She gives you a step-by-step on how to research things. Linda has a lot on her website as well, how to research this information. And so this is what I call the plant schedule. This is also what you would get with the design. So basically here, there's a key for each plant on the plan. It's a letter and a number, you can't really see it well. The plant name, so it's the scientific name. A little bit of the specifications, so how high it grows, what color it is, when it flowers, all of that. And then quantities, so how many you would need to be each plant, and then also the size of the can. So it's a gallon plant or a 5-gallon plant. And what you do with this schedule is you can send this to a nursery. You can email it to them or take it to them physically and say, do you have these plants? Now a good designer, which I hope I am, will already do some of that footwork and know that designing with plants that aren't available, you basically aren't designing, because it's like an invisible garden. If the nurseries around don't have these plants, it's kind of a useless design. So I will research and call nurseries and other suppliers and see if it's available. But as the owner, it's up to you to go buy it, get it, or your landscape contractor to go get it and buy it. What I also give you is a lookbook. So it's a photo of each plant, a description of the plant, and then a key letter and number that it's associated with the plan. So when you go in for installation, so it's either DIY or a contractor. I don't do any planting, I don't do any installation, I don't do any project management, but the plan that I would give you, and the plan that I give you, and the plant design, and the list, plus an irrigation design. You're gonna need somebody else. I don't do irrigation design, but those 3 main elements will help you get into your installation stage. So I do have ideas about irrigation. I've been to many classes on irrigation, but my plan does not include those. Your landscape contractor will be far better equipped with that information. So this is me, this is my business. This is my Instagram handle at HortBuzz LLC. I'd love to, if you have any questions, we'll do it during the Q&A. But design, again, as Molly pointed out, do this 3 or 4 months before you're even thinking of digging in and planting. It takes a while to figure out what you want, make sure the plan is correct. It's kind of like building a house. You can't build a house without a plan. So the same thing goes for gardens. You need to have a plan. Otherwise we call it guerrilla planting, where you just buy a plant and you stick it in. But you'll have far more success and you'll enjoy your garden. You'll want to be in your garden if it's a good plan. So that's my spiel. Here's Erin.
Let's give a big hand to our speakers tonight. So if we could turn up the lights, invite our speakers, bring your chairs over here. We're going to open up for questions and answers. Okay, I believe we have a question in the back.
One of the challenges of our area is you have a lot of gophers and ground squirrels, and you can't gopher hop does nothing.
The first week I moved to Redlands, a gopher popped up in my yard. And I turned to my father-in-law and I said, what do I do? But
So, well, are more established plants better, or is this just a problem I will always have?
so pest and plants, who wants to take this?
I had that problem too, but when I put the drought-tolerant garden in, they went away. And I think the reason is I think they like eating the grass roots. that are moist because you're watering your turf every day. It's moist and there's a lot of grass roots. And once you change your plant palette, at least for me, I don't have that problem anymore. Anybody else?
We had that problem more down in San Diego County. We're lucky in that we don't have it in our front yard. Gopher baskets help to get plants established, but boy, that's a pain to do it on everyone. Get a gopher snake. No, but really, I mean, if you bring in natural predators, that helps take care of these things. Even a dog can with gophers. Yeah, they're tough. When we have had them in our lower property, we will use one of the traps, the zap thing or one of those, and that's often what we just have to do down there, so that they don't make it up to the front.
Another question? Down here in the front.
Okay. What you were talking about, best time to plant is in the fall. When I drive around Redlands, I see a lot of activity going on. People doing their front yards and so forth. So blasted hot, there they are doing all the planting and so forth. So if you don't get your plan when you're doing the various steps, the 8 steps, and you don't get to the point, or you get to the point, should you wait until fall when it's winter coming in order to make the most successful design and redesign of your yard?
So the question was about timing and when best to plant, depending on when you've decided when.
I have some neighbors across the street from me that were doing exactly what you have said. And they brought in 3 very large sago palms, which, as you know, are extremely expensive. They put them in their yard in July, and they're already dead. I feel like with the investment that you're going to put in your garden, it does cost some money. I mean, I had a tree that died, an old orange tree that died, so I've been out plant shopping this last week. I went to Lowe's and Home Depot. I ended up at Cherry Valley Nursery, which, by the way, is a great place to go. But everything now is $10, $12, $15 even for a 1-gallon plant. Inflation, but it's not cheap. Even for 1-gallon plants, you can easily spend $100. And why would you want to take that $100 and put it out in your yard when it's 110 degrees and watch it dry up? So yeah, my advice is use the summertime to kill that grass. Turn the water on, do what you need to do, get rid of the grass, and when it starts cooling off again, then put your plants in the ground.
I don't have much to add, except that we have tried planting, even in the spring, late spring, and then May and June comes and it's really hot, so I agree. If you can wait, do it. I mean, landscape contractors, they need to work year round, so they'll say we can do it, and they'll water and give you water regimen, but your mortality will be a lot higher.
Yeah, I think all those hours that we spend in air conditioning, just think of that, like when you're in air conditioned rooms, like just do your research. That is research hours. When you're indoors, research, plan, design. So when it does cool off, you have all your materials, you have everything together, and actually landscape contractors are at least 3 to 4 months out for hiring. So think of it that way if you're gonna hire somebody. I was working with somebody in June and July, and he said, well, we're really pressed. It might not be until September, October. I said, perfect, because they're putting in all California natives, so, yeah.
Great. Over here on the right.
What does a little lawn area look like with those drought-resistant grasses? Does anybody have a slide? The other question is, what about cactus gardens? We started one, as we take walks in the neighborhood, we see areas with rods and little circles in the middle of them with with cacti planted, they can be quite attractive. Do they save more water than these shrubs and so forth we're talking about? Another thing I haven't been able to grow is California poppies. Apparently they don't need much water at all, and they thrive in neighbors' lawns, but they die in mine.
So if you want to discuss with me some images about drought-tolerant gardens after this, I've got a whole stack of images we can go
I
through.
was interested in what the grasses.
The grasses specifically.
Anything like normal lawns, or is it a totally different appearance?
Sure. So what do drought-tolerant plants look like? Cactuses and California poppies. Maybe Linda, you want to?
Yeah, I know with the poppies, and any time when you have a seed pack, they really just need water like every day. You just have to keep them watered if it's not raining, for them to get established. And yeah, cactus can be great. I know with succulent gardens, they some often need part shade. I mean, not all your succulents can take full sun, so you really have to look them up and see what their sun needs are. But I agree that a cactus and succulent garden can look very nice. Is there something else with that?
I would just mention for cactus, keep them away from your walkways, sidewalks, garage doors, anything like that. Keep them far away from wherever you're going to be walking or playing and stuff, just for safety reasons. But succulents, some of the larger ones, I call them my bumper plants. They kind of work a little bit like a nice edging plant. They're a little bit softer, so if you run into them if you're wearing shorts and you rub up against them with your bare leg, they're not going to hurt as bad.
Okay, we have time for a couple more questions in the front.
If you change your landscape to drought tolerant, including the parkway, what happens to that 100-year-old that's sitting out there?
So if you change your plan, what happens to your 100-year-old
How do you
oak?
prevent it from dying?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Stole all its water.
That's a great question. So if you're trying to transition to a drought-tolerant landscape, but you have established trees, what's the best way to help?
I was on the Redland Street Tree Committee for a while there, and you really have to keep up the watering regimen that your big oaks have had. You might be able to taper down a little bit, but you have to take that into account with your planning. I mean, it's going to be real important that you
had a lawn before which you watered twice a day.
Right.
Now you're going to dry landscape, there's no way you can match that water.
Yeah, it'll get, the surface roots will be less, but they also have some deeper roots, so you might be able to get around it with some deeper watering. But it's tricky. You want to keep your oak. So I would do the drought tolerant farther away from it. Keep that area watered or slowly taper off.
It's in the middle of the parkway, which you can't touch.
Anything more?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point and a great question. Depending on where your trees are and how they're being cared for, you might have to reconsider how you're going to irrigate those things. I'll have a slide coming up, but the city's putting together an Irrigation 101 coming up in November, and there's a lot of folks that just specialize, and maybe Brenda could speak more. There's just folks that specialize in how water works, how to bring water to areas and things like that, because we definitely want to keep those trees healthy. A couple more questions we have time for. Anybody else?
You might also call a certified arborist to give some advice.
That's a great point. A certified arborist will be able to provide that information as well. In the back.
At the risk of going outside the scope of today's talk, I'm interested in what's the prospects of getting reclaimed water service to residents.
That's a little beyond my scope. The question was about getting reclaimed water to use in our lawns. I don't know if anybody here wants to take a stab at that. Again, that would be a great question for the city and some of the other potential topics that we'd have coming up. Reclaimed water? Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Expanding it, but
In the front?
I wondered, Cherry Valley sells the little packets of mycorrhizal fungi. I wondered if any of you have used it to see if you have a better success rate for the plant surviving if you add in the mycorrhizal fungi?
We didn't really use it. I mean, I have used it in some of my plantings, and they've done well. I can't, I didn't do a test case to see if they did better, but especially if you have soil that's not so good. I think it's a good thing to consider.
Okay, we're running short on time, so there will be an opportunity to talk after this, but I just wanted to again thank our speakers for taking the time to be here. Let's give them one more big round of applause.